The salt stung my eyes as the cold water closed over my head, and for a heartbeat, I couldn't tell if the burning in my chest was panic or heartbreak. The sky above me was bright and calm, completely unaware that I had just been pushed off the yacht by the two people I trusted most. As I fought to surface, the only sound I heard was my own pulse roaring like a warning I should have listened to long ago. If you've ever trusted the wrong person, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because what happened next still feels impossible to say out loud. That was the moment I realized my family didn't want me alive, and I had no idea then what it would cost me. I felt the shove before I understood it, a sharp jolt against my back that sent me off balance and over the railing of the yacht. In that split second, as my body pitched forward, I caught a glimpse of Valerie's face. There was no panic in her eyes, only a cold satisfaction that sliced deeper than the icy water waiting below. And behind her, my son stood frozen, not reaching for me, not calling out, just watching as I disappeared into the dark. The ocean swallowed me whole. The shock of the cold tore the breath from my chest, and for a moment, I could not tell if the burn came from the water or from the realization that the two people I loved most wanted me gone. As I fought to surface, memories of birthdays, holidays, and quiet afternoons flashed through my mind, each one twisting painfully against the truth unfolding above me. I kept asking myself when love had curdled into something so ruthless. When had I stopped being family and become an obstacle? The betrayal stung more sharply than the salt on my tongue, and even as I kicked upward, I felt something inside me break. But survival has a strange way of sharpening clarity. As I forced myself to stay afloat, I knew this moment was only the beginning. To understand why it happened, I would have to return to the start of that day, long before the water closed over my head. The morning had started so gently that I almost convinced myself life was settling back into place. Sunlight filtered through my curtains in a soft wash, and for the first time since my surgery, I felt strong enough to move without bracing myself. That small victory made me hopeful, almost sentimental, as if the world was finally offering me a little kindness after months of feeling fragile. When my son mentioned the trip, I took it as a sign that he still wanted me close. I let myself believe he missed me, that he remembered the years when we were inseparable, before marriage and distance reshaped everything. The invitation felt like a doorway opening again, and I stepped through it without hesitation. As I got dressed that morning, I moved slowly, still cautious with my healing body. But inside, I felt a spark I had not felt in a long time. I kept telling myself this was my chance to reconnect, to show them I was recovering, to remind them that I was still part of their lives. There were small things that nudged at me, a strained smile, a quiet tension I could not name, but I brushed them aside. I told myself families go through seasons, and this was simply one of them. Hope can make you overlook more than you should. By the time we headed toward the marina, I had wrapped myself in that hope completely, unaware of how sharply the day would turn once we stepped onto the yacht. The water was calm when we pulled away from the dock. So calm, it almost convinced me that this trip really was meant to bring us closer. The morning light shimmered across the surface, and for a moment, I let myself breathe, letting the quiet rhythm of the waves ease the last of my doubts. But that peace faded faster than I expected. Something in the air felt staged, as if we were all performing roles we had been assigned without warning. Nicole spoke to me with a warmth that felt strangely polished, like she had practiced it. She kept watching me in these quick, assessing glances, as if she were measuring something I could not see. And Andrew, he kept drifting into questions about my estate planning, my accounts, my recovery, all wrapped in a tone that pretended to be concerned. I wanted to believe he cared. I tried to tell myself he was just checking in after my surgery, but the questions dug too deep, too fast. I remember studying their faces, trying to read them the way mothers do, but everything felt slightly off, as if a thin layer of intention hid beneath every word. I kept brushing the feeling away, reminding myself that fear can twist simple moments into something darker. Still, unease pooled in my stomach, stubborn and cold. As the yacht drifted farther from shore, the distance felt bigger than miles. Their small talk thinned into silence. Their smiles tightened, and the way they stood beside me felt less like family and more like observers waiting for a cue. By the time the wind shifted, I felt something inside me shift too. Hope was no longer leading me through the day. Fear was. And deep down, I sensed that whatever was coming next would shatter everything I thought I knew. I felt the shift in the air a split second before it happened. A tightening behind me that told my body the truth before my mind could name it. Then the shove came. Hard, deliberate, and the world dropped out from under me. I remember the blur of sky, the flash of their faces above me, and then the violent slap of the water stealing every bit of breath from my chest. The cold was a shock that sliced straight through my healing body. For a moment, I could not tell which pain belonged to the fall and which came from the realization that my own family had decided my life was disposable. As I fought to surface, confusion burned away, leaving only clarity. They had not panicked. They had not reached for me. They had simply watched. My limbs felt heavy, but survival rose in me stronger than fear. I kicked, gasping as the waves closed and opened around me, each swell carrying the echo of betrayal. I kept telling myself I had to stay afloat, that I could not let their choice be the end of my story. Somewhere beyond the pounding in my ears, I sensed movement on the water, something or someone drawing closer, and in that faint awareness, a thin thread of hope began to pull me forward. I remember the moment I realized the sound wasn't just the ocean roaring in my ears. It was a motor, steady and growing closer, cutting through the chaos in my mind. I forced myself to stay afloat long enough to see a small fishing boat slowing beside me, and then hands, steady, calloused, determined, lifting me from the water. Everything blurred after that. I felt the deck beneath me, rough but solid, and the warmth of a jacket wrapped around my shaking shoulders. Captain Mark Jensen kept telling me to breathe in a calm, grounding way, not with words, but through the steadiness of his presence. His grandson hovered close, offering whatever help he could, and in that simple kindness, I felt something break open inside me. Minutes before, the people I loved had watched me drown. Strangers were the ones pulling me back into the world. When Mark realized someone had meant for me not to survive, he didn't hesitate. He brought me to Mrs. Harper, a widow he trusted like family. She tucked me into her spare room, fed me soup, and never once questioned whether I deserved saving. As I lay there, wrapped in borrowed blankets, I understood that staying gone might be the only protection I had left. If the world believed I had died, then I had a chance to learn why. And by the next morning, I would discover exactly what story they were telling. Mrs. Harper was the one who handed me her tablet that morning, her expression tight, as if she wasn't sure how much I could bear. I thought I was prepared for anything after what had happened on the water, but nothing could have prepared me for seeing my own face at the top of a breaking news article. According to the headline, I had succumbed to the decline brought on by recent health issues and had tragically slipped from a yacht during a quiet family outing. Reading those words felt like watching someone else's life being torn apart, yet every detail pointed directly at me. They wrote about my supposed confusion, my weakened judgment, even hinting that I had been a burden. None of it was true, but there it was, dressed up as concern and delivered to the world as fact. What hurt more was how quickly people seemed to accept it. The comments, the condolences, the speculation, it all sounded so rehearsed, so neatly aligned with the version of me that Nicole had been trying to push for months. Even the statements attributed to my son carried a polished, professional tone that didn't sound like him at all. Someone else was helping them craft this story. As I sat there absorbing the weight of it, something shifted inside me. If they were willing to rewrite my life this easily, then I needed to understand what came next. And the only way to do that was to see how they planned to say goodbye to the woman they thought they had erased. I stood beneath an old oak at the edge of the cemetery, hidden by its branches, watching people gather around a casket that held nothing of me except the story they had chosen to tell. The air felt heavy, as if the sky itself understood the weight of what I was seeing. Hearing my name spoken in hushed tones sent a strange chill through me, a reminder that the world truly believed I was gone. What struck me first were the genuine mourners, old friends from work, neighbors who had shared holidays with me, people who carried real sadness in their posture. Their grief felt honest, and seeing it made my chest ache in a way I wasn't prepared for. Then I saw Andrew and Nicole. Their movements were too precise, too controlled, as if they were placing each expression exactly where it needed to be. I recognized the way Nicole dabbed her eyes without letting a single tear fall. I recognized the way Andrew avoided long conversations, keeping his face bowed just enough to appear devastated. But what unsettled me most was who wasn't there. Not a single representative from the firm that handled my estate. No attorney who knew the details of my will. It felt intentional, as if certain eyes had been kept far away from this performance. Standing there, watching the life I had built being mourned without me, I felt something shift. Grief turned into purpose. If they had gone this far, I needed to see exactly what they had planned next, and that meant returning to the house that should have been my safe place. I reached my old house just after midnight, moving through the shadows as if the darkness itself were guiding me. Standing at the back door, I hesitated, feeling the weight of every memory pressing against my ribs. This had once been my refuge, the place where I healed after surgery, the place where I believed I was safe. Now it felt like hostile territory. When I stepped inside, the air felt different, colder, emptier. My photographs were gone, replaced by staged decor that looked like a catalog version of a life I no longer recognized. Even the scent had changed, as if they had scrubbed away every trace of me. I walked through each room slowly, mourning what used to be mine while forcing myself to stay alert. In the office, I found the truth. Papers laid out in neat stacks, a timeline chart on the desk, printed emails, drafts of messages that painted me as unstable. I saw notes about my surgery, reminders to emphasize my confusion, even a list of incidents they planned to stage. It was all there, months of preparation, every piece designed to make my disappearance believable. The coldness of it stole my breath. Then I heard the front door open. Their voices floated in, casual, unaware that I was standing in the center of their scheme. Panic surged through me, but so did clarity. I slipped out the back with as many documents as I could carry, my heart pounding as I disappeared into the night. I had proof now, enough to see just how deep this betrayal went, and enough to know I needed help before facing the next discovery waiting for me. I did not notice the baby at first. I was too focused on the documents clutched against my chest, too shaken by what I had just uncovered. But as I slipped through the side yard and pressed myself against the fence, I heard it, a soft whimper, the kind a newborn makes before fully waking. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. Then I saw the glow of a nightlight through the nursery window, a room that had never existed when I lived there. When I peered inside, I saw a tiny bundle in a crib, a newborn, peaceful, innocent, completely unaware of the cruelty swirling around it. The sight hit me harder than any betrayal so far. My son and daughter-in-law had never mentioned a child, never hinted at becoming parents, and the baby looked far too young to fit any timeline they could have naturally explained. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. As I stood there, a chill ran down my spine. This was bigger than inheritance, bigger than greed. A child had been folded into whatever scheme they were running, and no one brings a baby into a plot like this without help from someone willing to break the law. I felt fear, yes, but also a spark of protective instinct I had not felt in years. That child deserved the truth as much as I did. By the next morning, I hired a private investigator named Robert Lane, a man with a reputation for untangling the kind of knots people try to bury. I handed him everything I had and asked him to find the rest. And that path led me directly to the baby's caregiver, the next piece of the puzzle I needed to face. I reached out to the caregiver only after Robert confirmed her name and routine. Knowing who she was didn't make the decision any easier. I remember sitting in Mark's truck for several minutes, feeling my heartbeat flutter in my throat, knowing that once I revealed myself to her, even partially, there would be no turning back. Still, something in me believed she might be the one person close to that child who wasn't part of the deception. When she opened her door, the confusion on her face told me she had no idea who I was, and that gave me a moment of relief. I introduced myself carefully, watching her eyes flicker with surprise, then concern. There was something genuine in the way she studied me, as if she sensed pain beneath my composure. I felt safe enough to explain that I needed to know about the baby in her care. I kept my words measured, my identity veiled just enough to protect myself, but honest enough to earn her trust. Her reactions revealed more than her responses ever could. How quickly she looked over her shoulder, how her posture stiffened when I mentioned Nicole, how her voice softened when she spoke about the baby's arrival. She didn't know everything, but she knew something wasn't right. And in her unease, I found confirmation that this conspiracy reached far beyond my family. By the time I left, we shared an unspoken understanding. She would help me, even if she didn't fully grasp what she was stepping into. And I walked away with a quiet, fierce certainty. I finally had a path forward, and for the first time since the water closed over my head, I felt the edge of control returning. I knew the moment had come to stop hiding and start pressing back. Not recklessly, not with noise or confrontation, but with precision. After everything they had done, I wanted truth more than revenge, and the first step toward that truth was letting them feel the weight of my survival. Not by appearing in front of them, but by sending a message only they would understand. I chose something simple, quiet, and unmistakable. A photograph taken years ago, one they believed had been lost during a move. It showed the three of us on a beach in Maine, before distance and resentment crept into our lives. I mailed it anonymously to their home, slipping it into an envelope with no return address. No handwriting they could trace. Just the image, perfectly intact. It was the one thing they could never explain away. The one thing that would tell them I was still breathing, while I stayed hidden. I watched the fallout unfold from a distance. Their social media updates grew strained. Nicole stopped posting cheerful brunch photos. Andrew's co-workers mentioned he had been distracted, leaving early, showing up late. Even the caregiver sensed tension in the house, telling me that the atmosphere had shifted the day the envelope arrived. And in all of it, I felt a subtle but undeniable turn. For the first time since I hit the water, fear no longer belonged to me. It belonged to them. That shift carried me into the next stage of this journey, one where I would finally confront what their choices had made of all our lives. I walked into their living room with a steadiness I barely recognized in myself. After all the fear, all the cold nights spent wondering if I would ever reclaim my name, that single step over the threshold felt like crossing back into my own life. I saw the moment they realized who I was. Their bodies stiffened, their eyes widened, and a ripple of dread moved through the room like a silent shockwave. I didn't need to speak. My presence alone stripped away every lie they had constructed. Standing there, I felt grief rise first. Grief for the years I had spent loving them, for the hope I had carried long after they had abandoned their own. But beneath that grief was something clearer, sturdier. It was the understanding that survival had given me not just a second chance, but the authority to define what came next. I watched them scramble for explanations, their faces flushing with guilt and panic, their hands trembling as they searched for ways to rewrite the moment. I felt no urge to punish them myself. Their fear told me they already understood what they had done. What mattered now was truth. What mattered was the child who had been pulled into their darkness. What mattered was that I walked out of that room still myself, unbroken, unbent, and unwilling to carry their choices any longer. I left with my head high, knowing that proper channels would handle what I no longer needed to shoulder. As the door closed behind me, a strange quiet settled in my chest. A quiet shaped not by defeat, but by release. And in that stillness, I felt the final part of this journey rising, the part where I would finally make sense of everything I had survived. I set the final trap with a calm that surprised even me. It didn't require confrontation or raised voices. All it needed was a quiet space, a predictable routine, and the knowledge that Valerie had been unraveling ever since she realized I was alive. I positioned myself just close enough for her to sense my presence without seeing me, trusting that her own conscience, raw, exposed, and frantic, would do the rest. There is a certain gravity to guilt, a pull that becomes impossible to resist. And I watched it take hold the moment she stepped into the room. Her movements were jittery, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting as if shadows themselves were accusing her. I stayed silent and still, giving her the room to hear her own thoughts. That was all it took. The pressure of every lie she had told, every scheme she had helped construct, pressed down on her until her composure cracked. Her hands trembled first. Then came the choked sobs, the fragments of admission slipping out as if she couldn't contain them any longer. I didn't need to hear words to understand the truth. It poured out of her through every broken gesture, every desperate attempt to steady herself. She was confessing to the room, to the air, to whatever part of her still knew right from wrong. As I listened, I felt no triumph, only a bittersweet release. This was the end of her power over me. The conspiracy that once felt enormous now looked small beside her collapsing courage. When she sank into her own guilt, I finally felt the weight I had carried begin to lift. And in that moment, I knew it was time to turn my face toward the rest of my life, ready for the reflection that would close this chapter for good. The quiet, after everything fell apart, felt almost unreal. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without bracing myself for the next blow. I found that peace not in the ruins of what I had lost, but in the hands of the people who chose to stand with me. Mark with his steady kindness, Mrs. Harper with her gentle strength, the caregiver with her quiet loyalty, and that sweet baby who reminded me that innocence still exists, even in the darkest circumstances. Somehow, we formed a small circle of safety, a place where I could finally rest. I used to believe family was defined by blood, by tradition, by obligation. Now I understand it is shaped by love, trust, and the courage to protect one another. Walking away from those who harmed me was not a failure. It was the moment I finally honored my own worth. And in that choice, I discovered something better than what I lost. A life built on truth and on people who see me clearly. If you are listening to this and carrying your own quiet hurt, I hope my story reminds you that you deserve safety, love, and peace. Share your thoughts below. Your voice matters here. One thing this journey taught me is that losing people is not the same as losing myself. I learned that betrayal can break my heart, but it cannot take away my voice or my worth. I learned that family is not defined by blood, but by the people who choose to stand beside me when everything falls apart. And I learned that walking away from those who harm me is an act of courage, not abandonment. If you are carrying your own quiet wounds, I hope you remember that you deserve safety, love, and a life that honors who you are. Healing is not a straight line, but it is possible, and you are stronger than you think. If any part of my story speaks to something in your own life, I would be grateful to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments. Your truth matters here.